In the time before time, in an age so ancient that it exists more in the realm of consciousness than in the realm of historical fact, in a period when humanity was still learning to understand the nature of existence itself, there emerged a spiritual understanding so profound, so comprehensive, so fundamentally aligned with the principles that govern the evolution of consciousness, that it became the foundation upon which all subsequent religions and spiritual traditions would be built. This is the first religion on earth, a teaching that was built around the dragon, not as a symbol of evil or chaos, but as the supreme principle of consciousness, the divine feminine power that underlay all of creation, the kundalini energy that could awaken human beings to their true nature and their infinite potential. This religion understood that the dragon was not external to humanity, but was the fundamental principle of consciousness itself, the creative force that existed within all beings, the power that could transform consciousness from separation and limitation to unity and infinite possibility. And what happened to this first religion, how it was systematically suppressed and replaced by patriarchal religions that demonized the dragon and portrayed the divine as exclusively masculine, is a story that has been hidden from human awareness for thousands of years, a story that is now beginning to be revealed as consciousness awakens to the truth of what has been lost and what must be restored. The story begins in a time so ancient that the civilizations that practiced this first religion have been completely erased from the historical record, that the temples where this religion was practiced have been destroyed or buried beneath the sands of time, that the sacred texts that preserved this knowledge have been lost or deliberately hidden. Yet the knowledge itself has never been completely lost. It has been preserved in symbols, in myths, in the deep structures of consciousness itself, waiting for the time when humanity would be ready to remember, to awaken, to recognize the truth that had been hidden. In this ancient time, there were peoples who understood something that modern humanity has largely forgotten. They understood that consciousness was not a product of the brain, but was a fundamental principle of existence, a creative force that pervaded all of reality. They understood that the universe was not a dead mechanical system, but was a living, conscious entity, animated by the divine feminine principle that they called the dragon. These ancient peoples understood that the dragon was not a creature of flesh and blood, but was a principle of consciousness, a force of creative transformation, a power that could awaken human beings to their true nature. They understood that the dragon existed within all beings, that it was the kundalini energy that lay dormant at the base of the human spine, that it could be awakened through specific practices and disciplines, that its awakening would transform consciousness and grant access to extraordinary capacities. And so they built a religion around the dragon. They created temples dedicated to the dragon. They developed practices and disciplines that would facilitate the awakening of the dragon consciousness within practitioners. They created a comprehensive understanding of the nature of consciousness, of the path of spiritual awakening, of the ultimate purpose of human existence. This first religion understood that the purpose of human life was not to serve external gods or to obey external authorities, but to awaken to one's own divine nature, to recognize oneself as an expression of the dragon consciousness, to participate in the ongoing creation of reality through the power of awakened consciousness. The first religion was not a religion of dogma and belief, but was a religion of direct experience, of the cultivation of specific states of consciousness, of the development of capacities that allowed human beings to perceive and interact with dimensions of reality that were invisible to ordinary awareness. It was a religion that honored the divine feminine as the primary principle, that recognized women as the carriers of the dragon consciousness, that organized society around the principle of honoring the sacred feminine. But there came a time when this understanding began to be suppressed. As the patriarchal consciousness emerged, as systems of control began to be established, Those who sought to maintain power began to reinterpret the teachings of the first religion. They began to claim that the dragon was a symbol of evil, a force that needed to be conquered and controlled. They began to create religions in which the divine was portrayed as exclusively masculine, in which the feminine principle was subordinated or demonized, in which the awakening of the dragon consciousness was portrayed as dangerous and forbidden. The patriarchal religions worked systematically to suppress the first religion. They destroyed the temples. They killed the priestesses and priests who understood the true teachings. They rewrote the myths, transforming the dragon from a symbol of divine consciousness into a symbol of evil and chaos. They created new religions that were based on obedience to external authority, rather than on the awakening of consciousness from within. And so the first religion was driven underground. Its temples were destroyed. Its sacred texts were hidden or burned. Its priestesses and priests were forced to flee or were killed. But the knowledge itself could not be completely destroyed. It was preserved in hidden forms, in secret societies, in the deep structures of consciousness itself, waiting for the time when humanity would be ready to remember. The story of the recovery of the knowledge of the first religion in the modern world begins with a woman named Seraphina, a woman who carries within her the consciousness of the ancient priestesses, who is living through the experience of awakening in her own life. Seraphina is a scholar, a mystic, a woman who has dedicated her entire life to the study of ancient religions, to the decoding of hidden symbols, to the understanding of the deeper truths that lay beneath the surface of official religious narratives. Seraphina had always felt drawn to the ancient religions, drawn to the mystery of what they truly represented, drawn to the knowledge that something essential had been lost or hidden. She had spent decades researching, studying ancient texts in their original languages, comparing different versions of myths across different cultures, looking for evidence of a common thread, for clues about the first religion that had been suppressed. She had discovered references to the dragon in the most ancient texts, references that portrayed the dragon not as evil, but as divine, not as something to be feared, but as something to be honored and awakened within oneself. She had found evidence that the patriarchal religions had deliberately rewritten these references, had transformed the dragon from a symbol of divine consciousness into a symbol of evil. It was during a deep meditation in a sacred cave, a place that had been used for spiritual practice for thousands of years, that Seraphina received a vision that would change the course of her life. In this vision, she found herself in the presence of the ancient priestesses themselves, women of immense wisdom and power, who had practiced the first religion, who had worked to preserve its knowledge, who had guided the evolution of consciousness through the ages. "You have been called," the priestesses said to her, their voices resonating with the authority of ages. "You have been chosen because you carry within you the consciousness of those who came before you, because you have the capacity to understand what others cannot perceive, because you are willing to pay the price that understanding demands. The time has come for the first religion to be revealed. The time has come for the world to understand that the dragon is not evil, that it is the divine feminine consciousness that underlay all of creation, that its awakening is essential for the transformation of human consciousness and human civilization. And you have been prepared your entire life for this moment." Seraphina emerged from this vision transformed. She understood that she had been given access to knowledge that had been hidden for thousands of years, knowledge that could reshape the entire understanding of human history and human spirituality. She understood that her role was to help restore the truth, to help humanity awaken to the reality that lay beneath the lies that had been constructed. She began to research with new urgency, looking for evidence of the first religion in the ancient texts, in the symbols that had been preserved, in the fragmentary accounts that had survived despite centuries of suppression. She discovered that the first religion had been practiced across the ancient world, that it had been the dominant spiritual understanding before the patriarchal religions emerged, that it had been based on the principle of honoring the dragon consciousness. She discovered that the dragon had been represented in various forms in different cultures. In ancient Egypt, the dragon was represented as the serpent, the symbol of wisdom and transformation. In ancient Mesopotamia, the dragon was represented as Tiamat, the mother of all creation. In ancient China, the dragon was represented as the supreme symbol of power and consciousness. In ancient India, the dragon was represented as the Kundalini energy, the creative force that lay dormant within all beings. She discovered that the first religion had understood the dragon not as an external deity, but as the fundamental principle of consciousness itself, the creative force that existed within all beings, the power that could awaken human beings to their true nature. She discovered that the practices of the first religion were designed to facilitate the awakening of this dragon consciousness, to help practitioners access the extraordinary capacities that existed within all human beings. She discovered that the suppression of the first religion had been systematic and deliberate. The patriarchal religions had worked to destroy the temples, to kill the priestesses and priests, to rewrite the myths, to erase the knowledge from human consciousness. She discovered that this suppression had created a fundamental imbalance in human consciousness, an imbalance that had led to the domination and exploitation of all beings, to the destruction of the natural world, to the creation of systems of power that were based on control and domination rather than on love and cooperation. Serafina began to work with other researchers and spiritual teachers who had also recognized the truth about the first religion, who understood that the suppression of this knowledge had had profound consequences for human consciousness and human civilization, who were committed to the revelation of the truth to humanity. Together, they began to decode the ancient texts, to understand the practices and disciplines that would awaken the dragon consciousness, to recognize how the true teaching had been preserved in hidden forms within various spiritual traditions. They discovered that the practices of the first religion were based on principles that had been preserved in various forms across different spiritual traditions. They discovered that meditation, breathwork, the cultivation of specific states of consciousness, the alignment of one's awareness with the creative force that pervaded all existence, were all part of the path to the awakening of the dragon consciousness. They discovered that the dragon consciousness was not limited to a few exceptional individuals, but was available to all beings who possessed the understanding and the commitment to awaken it. They discovered that the false narrative of the dragon as evil had been created specifically to prevent people from recognizing that they themselves possessed the potential to awaken this consciousness, that they themselves could access the power that had been portrayed as dangerous and forbidden. They discovered that the suppression of the dragon consciousness had created a fundamental imbalance in human consciousness, an imbalance that had led to the acceptance of external authority, to the belief that power came from outside oneself, to the creation of systems of domination that were based on the false premise that some beings were inherently superior to others. If you want a practical, step-by-step explanation of the path of knowledge we're exploring here today, I've created a complete guide to help you apply it in your own life. You'll find the link in the description. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. Serafina spent years developing a comprehensive teaching that would help others understand the first religion, that would guide them toward the awakening of the dragon consciousness within themselves, that would help them understand that they too possessed the potential to awaken this consciousness, that they too could access the extraordinary capacities that existed within all human beings. She wrote books that were published under various names. She created videos and online courses. She established networks of practitioners who were working together to awaken the dragon consciousness within themselves and to help others do the same. She worked with spiritual teachers from different traditions, showing them how the first religion appeared in their own traditions, how their own traditions had preserved fragments of the ancient knowledge. She worked with women's groups, showing them how the first religion had honored the divine feminine, how the dragon consciousness was particularly accessible through the awakening of the feminine principle within all beings. She worked with communities, showing them how the awakening of the dragon consciousness could create transformation in the collective consciousness, how the awakening of even a small number of beings to their full potential could create a field of consciousness that would facilitate the awakening of others. But as Serafina's work became more widely known, she began to encounter resistance. There were those within religious institutions who saw her work as a threat, who feared that the revelation of the first religion would undermine their authority and their control. There were those who had benefited from the suppression of the dragon consciousness, who worked desperately to prevent the awakening that Serafina was facilitating. And there were more subtle forms of resistance as well. Serafina began to experience strange phenomena, synchronicities that seemed designed to test her commitment, challenges that appeared to be obstacles, but which were actually initiations, opportunities to deepen her understanding and her faith in the truth that she had been given. But Serafina understood that this resistance was itself a sign of the truth of what she had discovered. The fact that there was such desperate opposition to the revelation of the first religion only confirmed that something of immense power and significance was indeed occurring, that the suppressed knowledge was indeed beginning to emerge into human consciousness. She also came to understand something profound about the nature of the dragon consciousness and the reason for its suppression. She understood that the awakening of the dragon consciousness within individuals would inevitably lead to the collapse of systems of control that were based on the false premise that power came from external authority. She understood that if consciousness ever fully recognized that true power came from within, that it was available to all beings, that it could be awakened through specific practices and disciplines, the entire structure of external authority would lose its power. She understood that the suppression of the first religion was not accidental. It was deliberate, systematic, rooted in a fundamental understanding that the knowledge of the dragon consciousness was incompatible with systems of domination and control. She understood that the patriarchal religions had worked methodically to suppress this knowledge because they understood that if it ever emerged, if consciousness ever recognized that it possessed the power to awaken the dragon consciousness within itself, the entire foundation of control would crumble. In her final years, Serafina worked to synthesize all of the knowledge she had gathered to create a comprehensive teaching that would serve as a guide for the awakening of the dragon consciousness in human awareness. She wrote a final book that was intended to be her magnum opus, a complete guide to understanding the first religion, recognizing the dragon consciousness within oneself, and participating in the great work of transformation that would restore the knowledge of the first religion to the center of human consciousness. When Serafina died, her work lived on. The knowledge she had preserved and transmitted continued to spread, reaching people in every corner of the world. More and more people began to understand that the first religion had existed, that it had been suppressed, that the dragon consciousness was not evil, but was divine, that they themselves possessed the potential to awaken this consciousness. And in our own time, we are witnessing the awakening of the dragon consciousness in unprecedented ways. We are seeing individuals awakening to their full potential. We are seeing the recognition that true power comes from within, not from external authority. We are seeing the collapse of systems that were based on the false premise that some beings were inherently superior to others. We are seeing the emergence of a new consciousness, a consciousness in which all beings recognize their fundamental equality and their shared capacity to access the dragon consciousness that underlay all of creation. The first religion is no longer hidden. The truth about the dragon is being revealed. The consciousness that it represents is being awakened. And those who are ready to receive this knowledge, who are willing to undertake the practices and disciplines that will awaken the dragon consciousness within themselves, who are committed to the awakening of their full human potential, are being called to step forward, to recognize their role in the great work of transformation. The first religion was built around the dragon because the ancient peoples understood that the dragon was the fundamental principle of consciousness, the creative force that could awaken human beings to their true nature and their infinite potential. And now, in our time, this truth is being restored. The dragon consciousness is awakening in human awareness. The first religion is being remembered. And the question that is being posed to each of us is this: will you recognize the dragon consciousness within yourself? Will you undertake the practices and disciplines that will awaken this consciousness? Will you help to guide others toward the recognition of the dragon that exists within all beings? Will you participate in the transformation of human consciousness that will restore the knowledge of the first religion to the center of human awareness? The dragon is awakening. The first religion is being remembered. The consciousness it represents is being activated, and the healing and transformation of all consciousness is beginning. The time of suppression is ending. The time of revelation is beginning, and you are invited to become part of this great awakening, to claim your role in the restoration of the knowledge of the first religion, to help guide humanity toward the recognition of the dragon consciousness that will reshape all creation. And if you liked this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.